Welcome to IU Sports Sunday. Nick Rodecap with you on this third Sunday in May. There we go. Time flies when you're having fun. The school year's been over for a couple weeks, and it's crazy because this is my last time hosting this show for about 3 months. I'll be in Tennessee for my internship between now and when I return. But we still have, as we always do, a lot to discuss this morning. And I got to say, the sun being up before 7 a.m. is awesome because that means that basically summer is here. I know it doesn't start for like a month, but look, we can finally play college baseball without wearing sweatshirts underneath our jerseys on a consistent basis, and that's great. So too is the fact that the NCAA softball postseason is in full swing, because that means that the NCAA baseball postseason is right around the corner. In fact, Big Ten teams, SEC teams, pretty much everybody, wrapped up their regular season play yesterday. And Indiana did enough. They didn't win the series finale against Michigan, but they got the first two. And that was enough to take the tiebreaker over the Wolverines and enter the Big Ten tournament as the number 6 seed. So the Big Ten tournament format this year for baseball is really, really weird. This is the third time the conference has changed the format in the last 3 years. I don't get it. I don't get why they changed the format again, but they did. So the way it works in the Big Ten baseball tournament, which of course takes place in Omaha, Nebraska, at Charles Schwab Field, the home of the College World Series, is there are 4 pools of 3 teams each. So 12 of the 17 Big Ten baseball teams made the conference tournament, including Indiana. And you have the top 4 seeds that are obviously split up among all 4 pools. So Oregon is the number 1 seed. They are in Pool A. UCLA, the 2 seed, in Pool B. Iowa is number 3 in Pool C with Indiana. And Pool D is 3 classic Big Ten rivals, USC, Washington, and Penn State. So the time slots are weird. Actually, the time slots are not that weird, but the Big Ten is weird because the bracket makes no sense. So we'll try to decipher it here. Indiana opens Big Ten play as the number 6 seed against 10th seeded Rutgers, who is a member of Pool C, just like Indiana, at 2 p.m. on Tuesday. And then if Indiana wins that, well, actually, you're guaranteed 2 games either way, so never mind. Indiana then plays again, I believe, on Friday. So that is really interesting, actually, because it looks like so. Indiana plays its first game on Tuesday, and then does not play again until Friday. And the reason I say that's weird for the Big Ten baseball tournament at Charles Schwab Field in Omaha, Nebraska, is that last year, and I believe the preceding years as well, my time covering college baseball has been very limited on account that this is the 3rd season which I've been a student. You look at what it was in the previous years, and it was just like a normal tournament where you play Tuesday. It was double elimination. You play Tuesday, then you play Wednesday, and you play until you lose, really. But it was double elimination. So I remember Indiana won its first game and then lost the next 2, one against Iowa and one against Michigan, but those were all on consecutive days. That was 2 years ago. Last year, Indiana made it to the Big Ten tournament as the number 3 seed, beat Purdue in its first game, played Ohio State the next day, and then maybe they were off on Thursday? Yeah, they were off on Thursday because they won their first 2 games to make it to the semifinals in the winner's bracket. I remember that. But you played the first 2 days, and that was kind of the equalizer. That's not the case this year. So Indiana actually has a very favorable draw here because you play on Tuesday against Rutgers, and Rutgers was bad this year. And then Iowa and Rutgers play on Wednesday, but Indiana doesn't play Iowa until Friday. Iowa, Rutgers, and Indiana are the 3 teams in Pool C. So whereas Iowa only has 1 day off after playing back-to-back... Oh, no, they don't play on Tuesday. Okay. Iowa doesn't play on Tuesday, but Iowa plays a day later and then has to play the same day, obviously, against Indiana. So Indiana should have an advantage when it comes to pitching staff health and availability. Whether or not that advantage leads to a win, I don't know. But the way it works is if a team goes 2-0 in their pool, they automatically win the pool, obviously, and advance to the Big Ten semifinals as a winner of one of the 4 pools. And then from there, it's just like in years past where you have 2 semifinal games, and then the Big Ten championship is on Sunday, or on, is it on, oh, why are they doing that? Oh, no, Big Ten, what are you doing? They're playing the Big Ten championship game at 2 p.m. on Sunday, May 25th. I don't think I need to point out why that's wrong, but I'll do it anyway. The Indy 500 is going to be taking place. Nobody's going to watch the game, except for fans of those 2 teams who care more about Big Ten baseball than they do about the greatest spectacle in racing, which, by the way, you can catch right here on WGCL. But, and not only can you catch it on WGCL, you could listen to it here on WGCL and then sync it to the TV broadcast because they lifted the blackout, which, as someone who's lived in central Indiana my entire life, was long overdue. But it's finally happened, which is fantastic. But the Big Ten used to play the Big Ten championship on Sunday morning. Last year, I remember, this was a fun experience. Indiana lost in the Big Ten semifinal on Saturday night last year against Nebraska. My friend Ben Haller, who spent some time with me on this show earlier this year, and we drove all the way out to Omaha to broadcast those games for IU Student Radio. We did not have a hotel for Saturday night because we didn't think that Indiana would make it that far. By the time that we realized Indiana had a chance to play on Sunday, a.k.a. on Saturday morning, all the hotels had been booked by Nebraska fans, which, I mean, Lincoln's only an hour away, but I guess they came from all over the state and the surrounding cities, I'm sure. So we didn't have a choice. We had to drive through the night from Omaha, Nebraska, back to Indiana. So we left Omaha after Indiana lost. That was at about 10 o'clock Central, I think, and drove all the way back, and I got home at like 7 a.m., and the Big Ten baseball championship was on 3 hours later. So I had to take a little power nap and wake up and watch Nebraska beat Penn State. Now, the Big Ten championship is being played right in the middle of the afternoon, which on any other day would be fine, but it's being played on Sunday, May 25th, a.k.a. Indy 500 race day. Yet another example of how the Big Ten Conference hates baseball, because it just the thinking there, and it's weird because Fox has the rights to IndyCar now, and of course the Big Ten Network is owned by Fox. So did nobody think to maybe push it up to like 10 o'clock? 10 o'clock Eastern, or I guess, well, no, because they played a semifinal game at 9 o'clock. They played a semifinal game at 9 o'clock Eastern, I think, last year when Indiana played Nebraska, because I called that game, and I remember having to get up really early. They played a semifinal game in the morning, and Nebraska won. It was actually a really good game. But it's not like it's unheard of for the Big Ten to play games. I mean, they have 4 days of pool play starting at 10 a.m. And I get that you want a later time slot to get more viewership, but the Big Ten Conference surely has to realize that their viewership numbers are going to be way down on Sunday for the Big Ten Baseball Championship, since it's taking place at 2 p.m., right in the middle of the Indianapolis 500. And look, I'm somebody who cares a lot about Big Ten baseball, but I'm not going to be watching that, one, because I'll be at my friend's wedding, but two, even if I wasn't at my friend's wedding, I would be watching the Indianapolis 500, and who knows, I'm at the wedding and I'm the best man, but I might still find a way to watch the Indy 500 because it's the greatest spectacle in racing. And dadgummit, I want to go back next year. I was at the track yesterday for qualifying. It was awesome. Just getting to be back at the track again, it's kind of cool because the Indy 500, the whole experience as a fan, you can pretty much just do whatever you want. Obviously within reason, don't break any laws, don't be an idiot. But you can bring coolers into the track, you can just chill. It was GA for qualifying, so we could just go anywhere. And that was really cool. I got to try out a racing simulator, and I found a seat that I want to replace my old seat. Anyway, all this is to say, the Indy 500 is king, and the Big Ten Conference hates baseball so much, they decided to put their conference championship game up against the Indy 500, which is just one of the dumbest things I've ever seen. So I don't know who made this schedule, but it's absolutely ridiculous that that is the case. Indiana has a favorable draw. They'll play 10th-seeded Rutgers at 2 p.m. on Tuesday, and all these games are on Big Ten Network. They're off on Wednesday and Thursday, and then they play Iowa, third-seeded Iowa, at 2 p.m. on Friday. All those times are Central, so those games will be at 3 o'clock Eastern on Big Ten Network on Tuesday and on Friday. But Indiana does not play on Wednesday or Thursday. And again, that's unusual because in years past, for example, last year, Indiana won on Tuesday and Wednesday, ended up in the winner's bracket with a 2-0 record going to the semifinal. They had Thursday off, and then the semifinal game was on, did it start a day late? I don't remember, but it worked. The semifinals were on Saturday, but it made more sense than this format does. And having 4 pools of 3 teams, you're going to have a bunch of teams that end up 1-1. And do I even want to know what the tiebreaker procedures are for this? Because I just don't know. So how do you determine a pool winner if you have a bunch of teams who are 1-1? Do you go by run differential? The Big Ten doesn't even specify, which is kind of par for the course for them. We'll see if they announced something in the bracket. Nope, they just posted a blank bracket with no descriptors at all. That's very par for the course for the Big Ten. As I've said before, I think the Big Ten actually hates baseball because they do a terrible job of marketing it, as does most national media. But the Big Ten does a very poor job of marketing its baseball product. It really doesn't even market it until the last 2 weeks or so of the regular season. And it's just not good. Not good at all. So they do not describe any tiebreaker procedures at all because every team plays 2 games. It would be one thing if you had 3 pools of 4 teams in the Big Ten baseball tournament, because then you would have an odd number of games. You would have 3 games played by each team, but these teams don't have enough pitching to play 3 games and then play 2 semifinals, and play a semifinal and then a championship. But you would at least have an odd number of games, so there's still a potential for ties. There's no easy way to do this. But the Big Ten found the most complicated way to do it, which is setting up a scenario where a bunch of teams go 1-1. And then I'm assuming, I don't know because the Big Ten doesn't specify this, but I'm assuming that the tiebreaker would either be run differential, maybe head-to-head. Say, for example, Indiana loses to Rutgers and beats Iowa, and Iowa beats Rutgers and obviously loses to Indiana. I'm twisting my brain up into a knot trying to do this. If you have a bunch of teams who are 1-1, then you're going to have a bunch of frustrated fans who don't know what's going on and don't know whether or not their team is moving on. That's the gist of it. The Big Ten hates baseball, but you're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Welcome back to IU Sports Sunday. Nick Rotocap with you. And I know I must be the Big Ten's biggest critic when it comes to baseball, but I feel like it's justified because they don't explain on their announcement of the tournament bracket. They don't explain how the tiebreakers work. If, say, for example, 2 teams go 1-1 in pool play, I don't get it. So be prepared for some confusion. Indiana, I think, will probably be one of those teams that goes 1-1. The question is, then, can Rutgers upset Iowa? The answer is probably no. Iowa has a ridiculously good pitching staff. The Hawkeyes did get upset by Oregon. Sorry, not upset. Oregon's a much better team. They got swept by Oregon in Iowa City. And had they not gotten swept, they probably could have won the Big Ten regular season title. But they didn't. So now they're the 3 seed instead of potentially the 1 seed. So the question becomes if Rutgers can somehow steal a game from Iowa, and anything can happen. I mean, Rutgers beat Iowa in the series opener back in March when they went to Piscataway, when Iowa visited Piscataway. And then Iowa won the next 2 games by a combined score of 28-6. But Rutgers won the series opener 5-4. So it's possible. And when you get these single games, anything can happen in the Big Ten tournament. For example, last year, Nebraska, as the 2 seed, as probably the favorite, because they were the 2 seed, because the game is played, the tournament is played in Omaha. Nebraska lost their first game to Ohio State and ended up in the losers bracket, where, of course, had they lost again, they would have been eliminated. They then ran the losers bracket and won the conference tournament, which was very impressive. And there were some Penn State fans griping about how the whole tournament is double elimination until you get to the championship game, so Nebraska was set up much better. Whereas if the championship game was like the rest of the tournament and it was double elimination, then Penn State could have just saved their pitching for the second game and beaten Nebraska, whereas Nebraska would have had to beat Penn State twice. That did not happen. But it was possible for a team to pull off an upset like Ohio State did, and then Ohio State lost to Indiana because they ran out of pitching. But now it's the same kind of thing. In that Rutgers, for example, maybe they just have Iowa's number, and in the nightcap on Wednesday, they knock Iowa down to 0-1, and then Indiana is 1-0, loses to Iowa, and Iowa beats Indiana, and both teams are 1-1. That's where a tiebreaker would come into play. And the Big Ten, at least on the official conference website, does not specify any tiebreakers for if that is to happen. So be prepared for some confusion. And that is where I will leave that. It's a great time to save at IU Credit Union. Go to IUCU.org to see their most current money market savings and certificate rates. That's IU Credit Union at IUCU.org. From baseball to softball, Indiana softball did end up making the NCAA tournament. They got a bid to the Fayetteville Regional in Arkansas, home of the Razorbacks. Lost the opening game. And when you lose your opening game in the NCAA tournament, baseball, softball, it's very hard to come back. It was a close game on Friday night, Indiana and Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State was the number 2 seed. Indiana hung with Oklahoma State for the first 5 innings of that game. Taylor Minnick, to the surprise of absolutely nobody, homered twice. And after 4 innings, it was looking good for Indiana. It was 6-4. And you were thinking, okay, hold on, get the final 9 outs, get out of here and improve to 1-0. Because when you improve to 1-0, you might lose to the number 1 seed, but you've got a chance. You give yourself a much better chance if you improve to 1-0. But Oklahoma State had a massive 6th inning and ended up winning 11-6. They scored 7 runs in the bottom of the 6th and then shut Indiana down in the 7th, which was unfortunate, but Oklahoma State got to Bree Copeland. She did not record an out in the 6th inning, gave up 7 runs, 5 of which were earned. There were a couple unearned runs in there, but also, there was a fielder's choice on what could have been a double play. Instead, it was a throwing error, and all the subsequent runs were unearned. But Indiana lost on Friday night 11-6, which set up an elimination game against St. Louis, the number 4 seed. Indiana won that game 4-2, setting up another meeting with Oklahoma State in the 1-1 game, and lost 16-8 in 6 innings to close their season. It was another big inning for Oklahoma State. They scored 12 runs in the top of the 3rd, and while Indiana responded with 6 in the bottom of the 4th, again, you were down 13-2 after 3 innings. That's insurmountable in most situations, although Indiana did blow a 12-3 lead in baseball this year, so it's not impossible. But Oklahoma State shut the door, and Indiana softball season comes to a close, 34-20, and their 3rd consecutive NCAA tournament berth, but not advancing out of the regionals, which I didn't expect that they would. It was very tough for them to get into the NCAA tournament. They found a way. They won a game, but that was all. So that's where Indiana softball season sits. It is over. Indiana baseball looking to make the NCAA tournament for the 3rd consecutive year as well. But in order to do that, they are going to need to probably go 2-0 in pool play at the very least. I think they would probably... I think they need to make the Big Ten championship because they finished the season 8 games over 500, 6th place in the Big Ten, 2 games over 500 in conference play. And on its face, that resume is not impressive at all. Indiana, I've talked about this a lot, so I will keep it brief, had several chances to boost its resume with quality wins, squandered all of them, which is very impressive. And the game that concerns me is the Friday game against Iowa coming up in the Big Ten tournament in Omaha, Nebraska, because Iowa swept Indiana this year in Iowa City. Two of them were pitchers' duels, I think. Let's take a look, because I remember a run rule and a couple pitchers' duels, but I want to make sure I get my information right. I gave them too much credit. The Friday night game was the pitchers' duel. Indiana lost 2-1 in 10 innings, and then Iowa came back and decided, yeah, you know what? One nail-biter is enough, outscoring Indiana 23-2 over the next two games, both of which were mercy rules. 13-2 and 10-0, both in 7 innings. So that tells me that Indiana is probably, I don't know this for sure, but I would assume Indiana is going to save its A-list arms for the meeting with Iowa. That's not to say that they're going to punt the Rutgers game, but Rutgers is a program that has been struggling now for a couple years. Last year, for example, they had one of the best shortstops in the country in Josh Kuroda-Grauer, who is now playing professional baseball in the minor leagues. And they finished, I think, with maybe 3 Big Ten wins. It was kind of absurd because you could tell how good Kuroda-Grauer was, but Rutgers was 6-18 in the Big Ten last year. This season, they are the 10th seed. They finished 28-27, 15-15 in league play. So just one game below Indiana. And shocker, this is what happens when you have a massive conference. You have a bunch of bloat in the middle of the standings for every sport. We saw the same thing happen in both football and basketball this year, where you have a bunch of teams that are just kind of there, and they don't separate themselves because there's just too many teams in the conference. So Rutgers and Indiana did not meet in the regular season this year, but last year Indiana took all 3. They swept them in late April. So those teams will meet in Indiana's first game of the Big Ten tournament, and then Indiana plays Iowa. I would think Indiana's going to go with some of their B-list arms against Rutgers, trying to make sure that you have the A-listers ready to go. I also think that the way Jeff Mercer does things, there's a chance that he'll bring in the aces of the staff, the likes of Cole Gilly, Ben Grable, Ryan Kraft. Bring those guys in for an inning or two, because that gives you, say if you need a shutdown inning, maybe you got down early, you take the lead, you need a quick 1-2-3. You bring those guys in to get that 1-2-3 inning, the guys who have been the most reliable all year, like I said, the likes of Ryan Kraft, Ben Grable, Cole Gilly, all veterans who know how to get outs efficiently and have proven that they can do that, especially down the stretch. I would think that you use some of those guys if you need to, but if not, then you keep them as fresh as possible for Iowa, because that is when you are going to need your A-listers. You are going to need to play a very complete game to beat those Iowa Hawkeyes, and credit to them, because I said they were fraudulent, but they haven't been fraudulent this year. They had a chance at the Big Ten title in the last week of the regular season, and Indiana can't say that, so there's your answer. But yeah, the A-list arms, Gilly, Kraft, Pete Haas might even be in there. I know he's been more of a midweek guy, but he's got a lot of appearances under his belt. But I suspect we'll probably see more along the lines of maybe Pete Haas, but also Aiden Decker-Petty, Darren Swanson, maybe Gavin Siebold in there as well. Guys who are used in lower leverage spots, but still have plenty of experience on weekends this season. That's what it looks like for Indiana baseball, most likely, in the Big Ten tournament in Omaha, Nebraska. Charles Schwab Field is the host site for all the games. You can catch them all on Big Ten Network. Indiana plays at 3 o'clock on Tuesday, and again at 3 o'clock Eastern on Friday. And the Big Ten semifinals are on Saturday. Those are both single elimination, and then the championship game is also single elimination, which for some reason the Big Ten decided to schedule for 2 o'clock next Sunday, also known as weather permitting, smack in the middle of the Indianapolis 500. So maybe if you're a NFL red zone aficionado, you'll have the double box up. Somehow you'll find a way. If YouTube TV lets you build your own multi-view, I guess you could do that. But you got to be a real Big Ten baseball sicko to do that. If Indiana makes it, though, I highly recommend the double box. Because Big Ten baseball at Charles Schwab Field is very weird. That field is massive. It usually plays like a pitcher's park. But last year, Nebraska turned it into a Little League field with how many home runs they hit. And they weren't just rinky-dink home runs. They were legit belted out of that place. And that's very hard to do because it plays a much, much bigger than it is. And it's a big park. If you've watched the College World Series, you probably hear the broadcasters talk about it a lot. Charles Schwab Field's dimensions are very pitcher-friendly. And I remember stepping into that stadium for the first time and thinking, wow, yeah, this place is huge. 335 to the corners, 375 to the alleys, and 408 to center. For comparison, Indiana, Bart Kaufman Field, 330 down the lines and 400 to center. So a little bit bigger than Bart Kaufman Field, but the wind is much more in favor of the pitchers than it is here in Bloomington, where it's almost always blowing out. So that is something to keep in mind. I suspect that because Indiana and Iowa played to a pitcher's duel once on Friday, the other two games were blowouts, but Indiana's going to have their A-list arms. They're going to have the guys that they threw on Friday trying to win that game. I suspect that Indiana and Iowa may have another pitcher's duel coming up later this week. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rotocap with you. If anybody was wondering what the Big Ten regular season over-under win totals are, we have them. If you're wondering about Big Ten football betting in May, maybe you need to call the number. But it's never too early to start thinking about it, I guess. Only 103 days until Indiana football season begins against Old Dominion right here in Beattown. I think it's going to be a little warmer then than it is today, though. And if anyone's wondering, a high just over 70 degrees today. I wouldn't mind that when Old Dominion comes to town on August 30th. And they will more than likely be one of Indiana's 8.5 wins. That's the line that Indiana's win total is set at per Circa Sports. That is the tied for the fourth highest win total in the Big Ten. Ohio State and Oregon at the top with 10.5. That's kind of par for the course considering they met in the Rose Bowl last year. Penn State at 10. Indiana plays Penn State this season. Indiana and Michigan both at 8.5. Michigan seems really high. I would assume it's because they have a weak schedule. But 8.5 wins for a team that last year had no answers at quarterback, has lost a lot of its talent to the draft. That's intriguing. Michigan's schedule looks like this. New Mexico, probably a win because it's at home. Oklahoma, that could be a weird game. Central Michigan, that's a bye game. Nebraska in Lincoln, home of the fake sellout, followed by Wisconsin, USC, and LA. Washington, at Michigan State, Purdue, at Northwestern, at Maryland, Ohio State. Okay, yeah, I guess they do have a weak schedule because you look at the teams that Michigan's playing. Nebraska was kind of bad last year. Yes, they won a bowl game, but they sucked. Wisconsin underachieved last year. USC underachieved. Washington was, again, this is what happens when you have a 17-team conference. You have a lot of teams who just appear to be kind of mid. Are they mid, or is it a product of their schedule? I don't really know. Northwestern was actually pretty good relative to recent years. Maryland was bad. Ohio State lost to Michigan, and that's all those fans care about. So I guess I could see 8.5 being the line for them. Washington at 7.5. Illinois at 7.5 seems kind of low. Illinois is kind of an interesting team because they're frisky and fun, and they made a bowl game, and they had a lot of buzz around that bowl game against South Carolina. So Illinois set at 7.5. That game against Indiana is going to be fun. That's here in Bloomington on September 20th. They host Western Illinois, followed by Duke, Western Michigan, Indiana, USC, Purdue, Ohio State, Washington, Rutgers, Maryland, Wisconsin, Northwestern. So a lot of the old Big Ten in there for Illinois. But they're going to be a fun team. Brett Bielema, a fun coach, fun team. For some reason, they went to overtime against Purdue last year. That was strange. And in case you're wondering, Purdue's projected win total, is the lowest of any team at 3, which makes total sense. First-year head coach, dumpster fire program, that makes a lot of sense. So I would say Indiana at 8.5. I'm not a betting man, it would be unethical for me to bet on Indiana football. That's one that I really think, though, I could see Indiana going 8-4. I could see Indiana going 10-2. I know Curt Cignetti's going to say no self-imposed limitations because that's how he rolls. But I really do not see an avenue where Indiana wins 2 of 3 against Iowa, Oregon, and Penn State. That's what it would take for Indiana, assuming you don't fall flat on your face in a game that you should win, right? I'm counting Old Dominion as a win, Kennesaw State, Indiana State, Illinois, although that's going to be close, Michigan State, UCLA, Maryland, Wisconsin, and Purdue as wins. That's 9. I could see Indiana losing to, for example, Illinois. That first Big Ten game, Illinois is a tough team. They always play Indiana close. It's hard to say with so much roster turnover which team is better, but that is a game that could go either way, and that's where it goes either 8-4 or 9-3. But if Indiana can win 2 of Iowa, Oregon, and Penn State, that is a massive success because all 3 of those games are on the road, and that's the concern that I have, is that I've seen it with my own eyes, the difference in how Indiana plays at home versus how Indiana plays on the road in big-time environments, at least the way that they did last year. The one big-time environment in the regular season was Ohio State, and except for the first drive, Indiana was awful in that game. In terms of limiting self-inflicted mistakes, I'm not talking about the fact that Ohio State was a glorified NFL team last year, and they won the national championship to prove it. I'm talking about dropping punts. I'm talking about completely missing pass protection assignments, those kinds of things. I'm talking about giving up a 25-yard completion on 3rd and 35. And then, did they give up the 4th down conversion after that? I don't think they did. But you shouldn't ever give up a 25-yard completion on 3rd and 35 because then you give your opponent the opportunity to maybe go for it if they're really feeling frisky. That game against Ohio State, they took their lunch money. Notre Dame, same kind of thing, looked okay early on. Curtis threw that pick to Xavier Watts in the red zone, which then turned into a 98-yard touchdown run courtesy of Jeremiah Love. And that was because of a missed assignment up front in the Indiana run defense. And that flipped the game on its head. I know it's never one play that decides a game in football, but those kinds of mistakes, an underthrown ball, a missed assignment, missed pass protection assignments repeatedly in the Ohio State game. I will admit that in terms of schematics and game planning, I don't know a lot about football. I don't know a lot about the X's and O's. I know enough from a broadcasting standpoint to get by. But even I could tell that there was something about Indiana's pass protection that was just completely lacking. And Indiana was particularly poor up front against better teams. And really, they didn't have a chance against Ohio State and Notre Dame because of that on both sides of the ball. And I know it's cliche, but Indiana had no pass blocking against Ohio State. Indiana had no run blocking against either Ohio State or Notre Dame. Even against Michigan in the second half, Indiana had no offense. And credit to the defense and the special teams for nailing it down because Indiana's offense died in the second half. And that's what great coaches do. Wink Martindale was an NFL coach for a long time. He was Michigan's defensive coordinator last year. And they adjusted really well at halftime defensively. The problem is, like I said before, Michigan didn't have a quarterback, and that was why they lost that game. It was not because their defense was poor. Their defense did everything they could. So that's why I'm concerned about Oregon, Iowa, and Penn State this year for Indiana, with all of those games being on the road. Oregon, Autzen Stadium, very tough place to play. Only about 64,000 seats there, but it's 64,000 loud Oregon fans. Kinnick Stadium in Iowa, always a great atmosphere, and of course, Happy Valley. I'm assuming that game against Indiana is going to be a whiteout. It hasn't been announced, but it's late in the season. It's November 8th. And if Indiana is still, say, in the running for a spot in the Big Ten title game, then, yeah, that game, you can probably pencil it in as a whiteout. I don't trust James Franklin in big games. I trust him a little more now because they played Ohio State very close. They lost, I think. That game was the same day that Indiana played Indiana played Michigan State last year. I believe Penn State lost that game because the only loss Ohio State had was to Michigan. So I trust James Franklin a little more in big games, but I feel like it would be really funny if Indiana went to State College and beat Penn State. I think that would be very funny. But you've also got to obviously take care of business against the bad teams. You've got to do what you're supposed to do against the bad teams. And this is where I would like Indiana to schedule tougher non-conference opponents, because a lot of people talk about, Curt Cignetti is scared of playing tough non-conference teams. Indiana didn't play Louisville last year, and Louisville fans were all up in arms about that, even though that was Tom Allen and not Cignetti that bought out of that game after that embarrassment that took place at Lucas Oil Stadium 2 years ago. I kind of blocked that game out of my memory because I was at that game and it was painful. But I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Old Dominion, Kennesaw State, and Indiana State somehow moved the needle for Indiana. You're going to have to take care of business and beat those teams convincingly. I'm talking like Western Illinois level blowout, not necessarily 77-3 because that was historic, but 42-0 would be nice for all of those games. 56-3, 62-0, nothing, something like that. What SEC teams do in their November bye games. Why are you playing bye games in November? It's because you're scared of going to 9 conference games. But my hatred for the SEC has been well documented. I do think Indiana's win total could go either way. Got to take care of business against the bad teams and then maybe steal a couple on the road. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rotacap with you. I wanted to correct the record on some of what I was talking about, how I don't trust James Franklin in big games. Ohio State did go into Happy Valley and beat Penn State, which is very tough. And then Oregon obviously winning by 1 point in Eugene over Ohio State because Dan Lanning is a sicko. So it's possible. Like, Indiana has a chance. Obviously, everybody has a chance. No self-imposed limitations. That's right, Curt Cignetti. Would I trust Ryan Day on the road in a tough game, or would I trust Curt Cignetti on the road? If you don't say Ryan Day after last season, I think you're kind of stupid, to be honest. That's no knock on Curt Cignetti, but let's be honest. Even against Notre Dame, he kind of put his tail between his legs, punting down 24 with 8 minutes left in the fourth quarter. Really? Or was it down 17? Punting down 3 scores with 8 minutes left. I was sitting up there in the press box thinking, okay, yeah, he just kind of conceded the game. And then Notre Dame put in their scout team, and Indiana made the final score a little closer than it looked. But I would trust Ryan Day before I trust Curt Cignetti in a big game. So, yeah, that's what concerns me, is that you could easily lose all 3 of those games, say go 9-3, which is still over your projected win total of 8.5, but it kind of does not do anything to quiet the doubts that Indiana, beat up on a bunch of cupcakes last year to get to 11 wins, which, let's be honest, they had a very favorable schedule and looked bad against really good teams. And if you want to hang with the big boys, you've got to prove that you can beat a couple of the good teams at some point, especially if you're going to talk as much as Curt Cignetti does. And that's also the thing, is that, especially in college football, which is just massive, right? You've got to back it up if you're going to talk the talk. I get it, and you want to get people fired up, but you got to do the winning part as well. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rotacap with you. We talked a little bit before the break about Ohio State football, and it's no joke in the state to the east of us. They hate Fox Big Noon Kickoff so much, they're trying to legislate. Basically, they're trying to legislate Big Noon Kickoff away from Ohio State. This comes after Ohio State scheduled Texas for week 1 this year. And then Fox saw that, their eyes lit up. They saw a bunch of dollar signs that said, oh, that's a Big Noon game, instead of it being a night game like it should be. So an Ohio representative named Tex Fisher presented a bill that is designed to get rid of Big Noon Kickoff games, basically, for Ohio State, with the exception of Michigan, because that is traditionally played at noon. It would prevent a game from beginning before 3:30 when a state university is involved. The other way to get a noon kick banned in the state of Ohio, according to this bill, is if both teams are ranked in the AP top 10. Tex Fisher, why are you wasting our time with this? That's what I would say if I was in the state of Ohio. There are much more pressing issues to tackle in the not-so-great state of Ohio than, Ohio State gets too many big noon games. I would say that I understand why you're upset that Ohio State isn't playing Texas at 3:30 or at 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock, one of those better time slots. But I don't know that trying to legislate it out of existence is the way to go. I don't know that there is a way to go when it comes to this, being mad about big noon games. Because at the end of the day, Fox pays a ton of money to broadcast those games. And those dollar signs are the things that actually do the talking. It's not going to be some bill introduced in the Ohio legislature. But I guess I admire the effort. I think a lot of people, and remember that this bill introduced in the Ohio legislature, trying to ban Big Noon Kickoff, basically, without naming Big Noon Kickoff. They want to ban Big Noon Kickoff. This comes after Ohio lawmakers tried to make it a felony to plant another school's flag on the field at Ohio Stadium after a game, because Michigan walked into Ohio Stadium and beat the Buckeyes and planted their flag at the 50. And then Ohio State linebacker Jack Sawyer crashed out, was screaming. There were fights. There was pepper spray, why? Why did the cops think it was a good idea to pepper spray a bunch of football players? That was a whole nother thing. That was stupid. That's what that was. Hey, Ohio State, you don't want another school planting their flag on your field? Don't lose to them. It's that simple. It really is that simple. If you don't like it, don't lose. That's what I said about the whole anti-flag legislation back when that was proposed and thankfully shot down. As for Big Noon Kickoff, I don't really know, because the Big Ten is a money printer. Most of that comes from these media contracts, and Fox has a pretty big piece of the pie in the Big Ten media contract because, I don't know, they own the Big Ten network. So Big Noon Kickoff is not going anywhere unless the Big Ten ditches Fox, which is not going to happen because ESPN has shown, especially in the last couple of years, that they hate the Big Ten because they didn't get in on the media deal. And I don't know why the Big Ten would ever go back to ESPN, given the way that network has covered this conference. I don't know. Maybe the thing that is still so puzzling to me is the way Kirk Herbstreit speaks about Big Ten teams, because he was a Big Ten quarterback. He played at Ohio State. He is one of that football program's most notable alums, if not for his play on the field, for his work in the media. As I would say, one of the top 3 most prominent analysts in all of college football. So why is Kirk Herbstreit so against the Big Ten? It's because of who signs his paychecks. This isn't rocket science. But I don't know why the Big Ten would ever, if Fox is going to pay $1 bajillion, that's an approximation, then I think that they're going to be content pissing off Ohio State fans and saying, here's another big noon game for you. Because you guys are a ratings darling. So sorry, but there's nothing that we're going to do to, and you don't, you hear other fan bases kind of complaining about Big Noon, but you never hear the complaint. You never see, for example, Michigan fans or Michigan lawmakers trying to introduce legislation to stop Big Noon Kickoff. I think, for example, like when Indiana played Ohio State, I was fine with it. I wasn't fine with the fact that the game started 15 minutes after the top of the hour. That was not cool. But Indiana being on that stage, sure, yeah. And I think most fan bases feel the same way. Oh, we get a game on Big Noon Kickoff. That's awesome. Now, it was weird, for example, a couple of years back when Colorado hosted Nebraska on Big Noon, because that means that they played that game at 10 a.m. Mountain Time. Why are you playing college football at 10 a.m. local? That's strange. But again, Fox paid a big chunk of change for that game, and it was a sellout at Folsom Field, so I guess there was no problem. Only Ohio State would complain about it and try to legislate it out of existence because Ohio State fans are Charmin Ultra Soft in football. In basketball, they have fans. They exist. In soccer, do they have fans? I don't know. Baseball, after this season, they probably don't. What'd they go? Like 4-26 in the Big Ten? Just horrible. Horrible numbers for Ohio State baseball this year. That's a whole nother story. Their first-year head coach, Justin Hare, welcome to the Big Ten. Yeah. They were putrid this year. Bottom of the Big Ten standings, and it wasn't even close. But yeah, Ohio State football fans are very soft. And don't even get them started calling it Ohio State University and not the Ohio State University. It's so corny. It is really corny. And I've said this before too, but Ohio State fans need to stop posting Ryan Day's address every single time they lose. Because that not only is it illegal, I get it. Like, you're mad at a coach. Oh boy, you're the first fan ever to be mad at a coach. No, you're not. But rational people don't dox their head football coach after a loss. That's what Ohio State fans were doing on Twitter after they lost to Michigan, which I get it. You're mad about a loss. I understand that feeling. As an Indiana football fan, I was there a lot when I was younger. I never posted a coach's address online, though. So Ohio State fans, get a grip. Stop trying to legislate Big Noon Kickoff out of existence. Because if you want your athletic department to keep printing revenue, which they actually reported like a $20 million deficit, which is very strange considering, I don't know, they're one of the most powerful athletic departments in the country, not just in the Big Ten, but in the country. They reported a $20 million deficit, which I think is partly because they sponsor a ton of sports that most Big Ten schools do not sponsor. They sponsor equestrian, I'm pretty sure, at Ohio State. Which, and again, their campus is nothing to write home about. Columbus as a city is not great. It kind of sucks, actually. I spent a lot of time there when I bowled for IU. Columbus sucks, honestly. It sucks. But they sponsor, and this is part of why Ohio State lost a lot of revenue, lost a lot of money last year in athletics. They sponsor sports like fencing. They sponsor gymnastics, which a lot of Big Ten schools sponsor gymnastics. They sponsor hockey, lacrosse, pistol, rifle shooting as well, which is kind of cool. They sponsor women's lacrosse, women's fencing, women's hockey, and their women's hockey program is really good. They sponsor women's dance. Like, they sponsor a whole bunch of sports. So that's why they lose a lot of money. But they also have the softest fans in the nation. And I'm not going to hear any arguments on it because if you've been around Ohio State fans, if you've seen the way that they conduct themselves after they lose, God forbid you lose a football game and you don't go 12-0 every season. It's very soft behavior. And I'm not surprised that of all the schools with fans that hate Big Noon Kickoff, Ohio State was the one that tried to legislate it out of existence. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Becker and IU Sports Sunday. Surprising numbers coming from the financial side of college sports earlier this week. The Big Ten generated more revenue than the SEC in the 2024 fiscal year. This is coming from Steve Berkowitz of USA Today. This was the final fiscal year for the Power 5 conferences. So the Pac-12 has numbers in here. This is from Steve Berkowitz, again, of USA Today, talking about how the beginnings of the vast change that we've seen throughout college sports over the last couple of years were taking shape and starting to impact conferences financially. Berkowitz talking about how with schools' affiliations beginning to change, various legal entanglements, 3 of the 5 power conferences reported revenue declines in their federal tax records for the 2024 fiscal year, and the Power Five's combined revenue declined by a small amount as well. Berkowitz says that it's far from a cause for alarm, but it is the first such year-over-year decrease in a non-pandemic affected year dating back to when USA Today began compiling the records in 2011, when the Big East was still playing football. In most years, Berkowitz says, the annual increase has been at least $150 million. And Berkowitz says that might return to being the norm in the power conferences soon, with the Big Ten and the SEC both likely hitting $1 billion in revenue for the 2025 fiscal year, and the death of the Pac-12 boosting income for the Big 12 and the ACC. So Berkowitz talks about how the Pac-12 generated in the 2024 fiscal year over $566 million in revenue, which ranked 4th among Power 5 conferences. Oregon State and Washington State got bigger payouts because they stayed. They got $46.6 million, and the other 10 schools got $30.15 million. So the Pac-12, as you might expect, lost a ton of revenue year over year because of the schools getting ready to leave, and the Pac-12 network being terrible operated at a $14 million loss. And also the Pac-12 did not get revenue from the Rose Bowl because the Rose Bowl became a college football playoff game as opposed to a game affiliated with the Pac-12. And that happens every 3 years, so that's normal. A bunch of legal disputes in the Pac-12 as well taking place. Just that conference is in disarray. And it is, I don't know if it's their own fault. They definitely had a hand in it because they thought that their product was worth much more than it was. But just a total shame that the Pac-12 is dead. The ACC, though, generated a ton more revenue compared to the Pac-12. Again, the Pac-12 just over $566 million per USA Today. The ACC over $711 million. And it's kind of funny because you look at the per-school payouts. Notre Dame got payouts from the ACC because, of course, they're in the ACC for every sport except football. And I would say that they should join the ACC for football because they basically play an ACC schedule anyway. But after Notre Dame making it to the national championship, they get to keep all the money. There are no other schools to distribute that money to. Notre Dame got to keep all of it. I think they got $20 million for making the national championship. So they're not going to join the ACC for football anytime soon. The Big 12 was last in the 2024 fiscal year for revenue among Power 5 conferences. The Big 12 generated less than the Pac-12 in the Pac-12's final full year of existence, which is kind of funny when you think about it. Then again, in 2011-ish, it was around that time, if ESPN did not step in, the Big 12 might have gone under, so that's not actually really that surprising. The Big 12 is just weird. It's just kind of there. It just exists. They don't really do much. They're just there. And then comes the Big Ten and the SEC. But what's surprising, at least to me, I don't know. Actually, I don't know if it's that surprising to me. It's interesting. It's intriguing. The Big Ten generated $928.1 million in revenue. The SEC was lower than that by almost $100 million. So what that tells you is that Big Ten expansion is working as intended. And obviously those revenue figures are before the 4 Pac-12 schools joined. But that tells you that the Big Ten is printing money. And again, both the Big Ten and the SEC are probably going to be north of $1 billion in revenue next year. Or I guess this fiscal year, when the reports come out about this time next year. So, yeah, the rich keep getting richer, and everybody else kind of has to suffer. And this all kind of goes back to when the Pac-12 needed a new media deal, and they vastly overestimated the value of their conference. And that was what led to the Los Angeles schools and also Oregon and Washington kind of realizing, hey, we're doing most of the heavy lifting here. Cal, Stanford, Washington State, Oregon State, Colorado, Utah, like, you guys aren't really doing a whole lot. It's basically the West Coast schools, as in the two schools in LA, Oregon because of football, and at the time, Washington because of football. But everybody else was just kind of riding the coattails. So those schools, the four that were generating most of the revenue, said, hey, we want more money. But the networks laughed at them and said, yeah, well, that's great and all, but you're not worth that much. And so you got to go find somebody else. And they didn't find anybody else. So then everybody skipped town. And for those schools that skipped town, it's working great. But you do have to feel for the student athletes who were impacted by it, especially those who ended up in the ACC. Cal, Stanford, SMU for some reason. Because, Cal, for example, Cal Boston College is now a conference game. Which, again, I've said this before, but it just doesn't sit right with me. But as long as the dollar signs keep going up for the big conferences like they are, it's not going to change. It is not going to change. And I do wonder if at some point soon we're probably just going to have like a collective bargaining agreement in college sports, and we're just going to go full professional because there's so much money wrapped up. We're talking close to $1 billion in total between both the SEC and the Big Ten on their own. So much more money than every other conference combined. I wonder if those two are just going to go on their own. Say that they don't need the NCAA anymore because the NCAA has not had control for a while. As far as governing college sports goes, I don't know. I guess that's their job or something. They don't do a very good job of it. Even though their headquarters are in Indianapolis, so usually I'd be partial to them. But no. The NCAA is very bad at what it's supposed to do. And because of that, I do think that there's a chance you might see the Big Ten and the SEC say, okay, we're going to form our own Super League. Now, I don't know how that would work for the non-revenue sports. I really don't. Because, for example, let's just use baseball as a barometer. The SEC would win everything. The SEC is as dominant in baseball as the national media likes to think that it is in football. The SEC is that much better than everybody at baseball. That's why SEC baseball is the most covered college baseball product in the country, because it is the best, as in the best players, the best fan bases, the most electric atmospheres. Partly because the SEC does a much better job of marketing baseball than the Big Ten does. But as far as football goes, as a Big Ten fan, it would be fun. But as somebody else, like as a college sports fan, what would the average college sports fan think about it? Because, like Michigan, App State, those kinds of upsets are super rare, but they used to happen. Now those upsets are almost impossible to come by because of the money disparity. And also remember, as revenue sharing is set to take effect at the beginning of the 2025 academic year, the conferences that are generating less revenue are going to have a tougher time. And that doesn't just go for the power conferences, that goes for everybody. So I think you're going to continue seeing what we saw a little bit already in this USA Today report from Steve Berkowitz, that the rich will continue to get richer while everybody else is going to fight for table scraps in the world of college athletics. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rodecap with you. I remember a little bit earlier on, I was talking about how Notre Dame should really just join the ACC for football, but they never will. Well, Clemson and Notre Dame are scheduled to play, I believe it's a home and home. but those games will not count for Notre Dame's. Well, it's not even a home and home, actually. It's a 12-game series. So this will take place between 2027 and 2038 every year, alternating between South Bend and Clemson. But the ACC is not going to count it against Notre Dame's 5 games against ACC opponents that they have to play every year. Which, again, this is like the weirdest dynamic in college sports because Notre Dame is not in the ACC. They are independent, but they play an ACC schedule. And Clemson's not going to count against that or count towards, I guess. I think I have it backwards. I do have it backwards. No, I had it right the first time. I just can't read because I'm bad at reading. The ACC said to Notre Dame, hey, you're playing this home and home against Clemson every year for 12 years. We're not going to count it towards the 5 games against ACC opponents that you must play in South Bend. Which begs the question, should Notre Dame football just be added to the ACC? And the answer here isn't just that no, Notre Dame shouldn't join the ACC, because for them, that would make no sense. It's that likely by 2027, Clemson isn't even going to be in the ACC because they and Florida State have shown very clearly and openly that they want out, and that they've wanted out since the 2023 playoff debacle where FSU went undefeated and got left out because of the hypothetical that the Seminoles would not be the same without their quarterback, Jordan Travis, who, by the way, just recently medically retired from football as a result of the injuries that he sustained that ended his college career at Florida State in 2023. So it's not just that Notre Dame is getting off easy by playing Clemson and not having that count against their ACC quota. It's that the ACC isn't going to look the same when that series starts as it does right now. I think Clemson and Florida State, if they could leave the ACC, then they would. But they haven't found a legal loophole to do it yet. That doesn't mean that they won't. They probably will. Because, at least as far as football goes, they kind of don't belong in the ACC. At least that's not how they see it. Personally, I always thought that Clemson was in the SEC when I was naive and stupid. Them being in the ACC for football and everything else, it feels like they're bigger than that conference. And again, that kind of goes back to the whole super conference thing. But Clemson is one of the biggest brands in college football. Florida State was really freaking good for a while. And obviously they had a horrible year last year. Preseason top 10. Preseason polls don't mean anything. Florida State was horrible. But they want out because they make more money. They generate more revenue than most ACC schools, especially in football. Like compared to their basketball programs, nobody really cares about Duke football. Nobody really cares about North Carolina football, except for Bill Belichick and the Jordan Hudson drama, yada, yada, yada. I would love to, in a hypothetical world where you could bet on people's personal lives, I would love to bet that Bill Belichick is going to get fired before he even coaches a game at North Carolina. I think that has an outside shot of happening. I'm not going to say it has a real chance of happening, but I think it has an outside shot of happening. As far as Clemson and Florida State go, they're going to want out. They're going to want to join the SEC. And I think that is what's going to happen sooner rather than later, probably within the next year or two, because they've shown since the exclusion from the CFP that they are not fans of being in the ACC because the ACC is seen as a weaker conference compared to the Big Ten and the SEC. And the reports coming out of various outlets around the country about the 16-team college football playoff would, I think, only bolster the arguments of Clemson and FSU to get in to the SEC. Ross Dellinger of Yahoo Sports is one of the writers who reported this. There's growing support for a 16-team playoff bracket where the auto bids would look like this. The SEC and the Big Ten would both get 4 auto bids. Which, what? Okay. Absurdity aside, the SEC and the Big Ten would each get 4. The ACC and the Big 12 would each get 2. The group of 6 would get 1, and there would be 3 at-large bids. So Clemson and Florida State are going to see this and say, oh, we could join this conference and have, well, the statistics don't exactly line up, but we would have 2 additional opportunities to get a bid to the CFP and make more money than we would if we stay put. You could also get innocent at large, but you could be guaranteed a spot just by being in the SEC and being one of the top 4 teams. Why would you not do that? There's also the play-in games. Why are we treating this like basketball? That's a whole nother thing. If this goes through, if you have a 16-team college football playoff where the number 4 and number 6, the 3rd place and 6th place teams in both the SEC and the Big Ten, and the 4th place and 5th place teams in those conferences play-in games to get into the CFP, you're basically just playing a full NFL season at this point. Because you'll play 12 regular season games. If you're in let's say if you're in 3rd place, right? You finish 3rd in the Big Ten, you don't make the conference championship. You play a play-in game. So that's 13. And then you're in the 16-team college football playoff. So 14, 15, 16, 17 if you were to make it to the national championship. Because you go 16 to 8, 8 to 4, 4 to 2. And it's absurd. It is completely absurd because it used to just be, you play 12 games plus a bowl game. 13, that's reasonable. But playing 17 games, that's insane. That is completely insane to do that. If there's smoke, there's fire. My guess is that this is going to happen. Because if it walks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. So don't be surprised if this happens. This will probably happen in 2026, you would think. I would assume that's when this is going to happen, because the college football playoff will enter into a 6-year, $7.8 billion contract with ESPN. So, yeah, the cards are on the table for this to happen. Not in 2025, but in 26. You go to 16 teams. And this all started because people were complaining that Team X didn't get a shot because there weren't enough spots. Florida State didn't get a shot because there were enough spots. And then the argument became, if Florida State was in the SEC and they had a 13-0 record, nobody would bat an eye. So if the college football playoff expands to 16 teams, you can almost guarantee, in my opinion, I have no facts to back this up, but this is just based on everything that we've seen as far as Florida State and Clemson both wanting out of the ACC. That is a fact. They have not said anything about, we're joining the SEC. No, they haven't said anything like that. But I do think that if the college football playoff officially expands to 16 teams, where the SEC and the Big Ten combine for 50% of the spots, then you can bet that Clemson and Florida State are going to want in on the SEC. And you're just going to continue trending towards a Super League. I think that's going to happen much sooner rather than later. You're listening to IU Sports Sunday. Back here on IU Sports Sunday, Nick Rotacap with you. Mentioned that the Diamond Sports are entering the postseason swing. The NCAA softball regionals are underway Actually, the finals are today. I shouldn't just say they're underway. The Supers will be here before we know it. The Big Ten baseball tournament begins on Tuesday, and with that, teams like Indiana will try to make their final cases for an NCAA tournament at-large bid. We've got a lot of different projections for the field, one of which is from 11.7 College Baseball, which is an outlet that covers college baseball nationally. And they released a field of 64 projection earlier this morning. The top 16 national seeds, those are your regional hosts, in order look like this. You've got Texas, Arkansas, Vanderbilt, Georgia, so SEC everywhere, no surprise, followed by North Carolina, a perennial powerhouse of the ACC, Auburn, LSU, Oregon, which won the Big Ten regular season title, followed by Oregon State at 9. They're doing just fine without the Pac-12. Coastal Carolina is your mid-major out of the Sun Belt hosting. Florida State, Clemson, two future SEC schools, if my speculation is to be believed. Followed by UCLA, who Indiana had a chance to beat a couple times earlier this year. Georgia Tech, Florida, and Alabama. So those are your hosts. We'll go to the bubble because the bubble is very interesting as far as the Big Ten is concerned. The last four in, USC, Troy, Kentucky, and Xavier. Indiana played USC and Xavier and went a combined 2-3 against those teams this year. The first four out, UTRGV, as in University of Texas, Rio Grande Valley, I think. That sounds right. Notre Dame, Cal Poly, and Southeastern Louisiana. The next four out, this is funny, Texas A&M, Indiana, Virginia Tech, Western Kentucky. I say it's funny because Texas A&M was the preseason number 1 overall team. Consensus number 1. Like, there was no doubt. Led by future first-round pick Jace LaViolette. They closed the second to last week of the regular season. I shouldn't say they closed. The second to last week of the regular season. Texas A&M hosted Missouri. 0-24 in the SEC, Missouri was. They swept Texas A&M in College Station. Yikes. That's the kind of season it's been for A&M. They now find themselves way outside the NCAA tournament bubble. Or on the bubble, but on the wrong side of the bubble, and it's not even close. As one of the next four out. Indiana is also there. And if you look at this projection from 11.7, there are no traditional Big Ten teams in the field. I think that is something that has a very real chance of happening. It sounds kind of weird because you look at the standings and you think, oh, well, Iowa is the third best team in the conference. Here's the catch. Iowa is bad if you look at their numbers. They played 7 quad 1 games this year and went 0-6-1 in those games. I believe one of those was a tie against Oregon State that occurred, I want to say, last week. It was weird because it was a travel curfew, yeah. So Iowa played Oregon State in Des Moines last weekend. Lost the first 2 games to the Beavers, which, Oregon State's a very good team. And then the series finale, Iowa looking to avoid the sweep, Oregon State looking to wrap it up. Oregon State takes the lead in the top of the 10th. Iowa then ties it in the bottom of the 10th, and the game ends because of what they call the travel curfew. My whole thing is, school's over, so why not just play the game? Finish it. Or start it earlier, but what's done is done. Iowa lost every other quad 1 game they played, and they played 6 other games. They had their chances to get a signature win. Also, they had 3 chances against Oregon at home this weekend. So in the last 2 weeks of the regular season, Iowa played 6 quad 1 games at home and did not win a single one. That's because they're actually not that good. Yes, they finished 3rd in the Big Ten. Yes, they won 32 games, but they actually aren't that good. They have the lowest winning percentage of any team in the top 4 in the Big Ten standings. Oregon, 41-13. That's 759. UCLA, 39-15. That's 722. USC, 34-20. 630 winning percentage. USC is one of the last 4 in. Remember, a couple months back, Indiana baseball played USC. And they were up 13-2 in the rubber match. And they blew it. They were up 12-3 in the rubber match after 5 innings, and they blew it, and they lost 13-12, and they lost the series. If Indiana wins that game, I would say that if Indiana wins that game and wins one of the 2 games that they blew against Xavier, you're probably on the other side of the bubble, but Indiana's not. You look at the rest of the projection from 11.7, looking at the NCAA baseball tournament, which the field will be set in 8 days. There is no traditional Big Ten team. Again, Iowa, good on paper if you just look at their record in Big Ten play. But outside of that, the other 4 teams in the top 5 are former Pac-12 teams. Washington, 3 games above 500 in the regular season. They were 1 game better than Indiana in the Big Ten standings, but Washington was also bad. So that's why there are no traditional Big Ten teams in the field. And that's what happens when you realign the conferences and you end up with the Pac-12 having been one of the most prolific baseball conferences in the nation. Of course they take it over. That's like the funniest possible thing, is if the Big Ten is entirely represented in the NCAA tournament by Pac-12 schools. That would be really funny. So that is something to keep an eye on. Indiana's going to need a run. Iowa's going to need a run in the Big Ten tournament. One of those teams is going to have to do something. Probably at least make the semifinal if you're Iowa. And if you're Indiana, I'd say you have to make the Big Ten championship to have a shot at the NCAA tournament. You might even have to win it, depending on how the other conference tournaments shake out. We've got a very eventful couple of weeks coming up here in Indianapolis and in the sports world in general. Indy 500 qualifying wraps up today. The Firestone Fast 12 bump day, that's from 4 to 7. You can catch it here on WGCL. We will have a pole sitter at this time tomorrow. The Eastern Conference Finals gets underway on Wednesday. The Pacers are at Madison Square Garden. Mark Boyle and Eddie Gill will have the call. That game tips at 8 o'clock here on WGCL. Game 2 is on Friday night. That game will be on TNT. Pacers and Knicks. And then, Game 3, this city's going to explode in a week. And by this city, I mean Indianapolis. You have the 109th running of the Indianapolis 500. Pre-race coverage begins at 11. And then Game 3 of the Eastern Conference Finals, Pacers and Knicks at Gainbridge Fieldhouse at 8 o'clock, Memorial Day, and then I'll be at Game 4 on Tuesday night when the Knicks are in town against the Pacers. I want to thank Kent Sterling for letting me host IU Sports Sunday throughout this school year. It's been a blast. I want to thank Jeremy Gray for connecting me with Kent and giving me the opportunity to host this show here on WGCL. Jeremy was a fantastic sportscasting professor when I had his class a couple years ago, and he's been great to me every time I run into him at an IU game. He's fantastic, so I want to thank Jeremy and Kent. I want to thank all of you for listening to IU Sports Sunday here on WGCL. We're not going anywhere. I'm going to Tennessee for my internship with the Greenville Flyboys of the Appalachian League. You can follow me on Twitter at Nick Rotocap. I'll have all the fun happenings from down in East Tennessee throughout the summer. I will be back. We will be back in August. I will be back on the show in mid-August to talk all things college sports, Indiana football, just like we did this year, Indiana baseball, railing against the SEC because that's become one of my favorite pastimes. But that's going to do it for us here on IU Sports Sunday. Indy 500 qualifying gets underway. Day 2 at 4 p.m. You've been listening to IU Sports Sunday on WGCL.